You want to talk about a punch to the gut? I'm talking about a life-altering, universe-shattering moment where one little text message makes you realize everything you thought was real, everything you thought was promised to you, was a lie. I was sitting at my kitchen table, nursing a terrible cup of coffee, when my phone up with a text from my dad. It was short, blunt, and it felt like a physical blow. Your trust fund is gone. Just like that, the $2 million inheritance my grandmother had set aside for me, the money that represented my future, my education, my stability, was evaporated. But here's the kicker, the part that turned the blood in my veins to ice. He sent that text not knowing I had just sold the one thing he desperately needed. The thing that would have saved his entire miserable operation. And I did it that very morning. Was I wrong for letting him fall when I held the parachute, even though I hadn't known the extent of his betrayal yet? Tell me, honestly, if you would have done the same thing. To even begin to understand this mess, you have to know about my family and, specifically, the history of this trust fund. My parents, David and Carol, were not the kind of people who believed in handouts. Unless, of course, they were the ones handing them out, which usually came with a million strings attached. They were well off, upper middle class, and everything in our lives was dictated by appearances and the careful maintenance of their social standing. My dad, David, was a real estate developer, the kind of guy who wore Italian suits to breakfast, and whose whole identity was wrapped up in how much he was worth. My mother, Carol, was the silent partner in his performance, managing the social calendar, the charity galas, and ensuring I was always the perfectly dressed, perfectly behaved daughter. I was an only child, which meant the full weight of their expectations rested squarely on my shoulders. It was stifling, honestly. The trust fund, though, that was different. That was from my grandmother Eleanor, my dad's mother. She was a proper, old money matriarch, the one person in my life who saw me as more than an extension of my parents' brand. When she passed away 5 years ago, she left me a substantial trust fund. It was $2 million set to be fully accessible on my 25th birthday, which was just 6 weeks away at the time the text arrived. The conditions of the trust were famously ironclad, irrevocable, managed by an independent party firm, with my parents explicitly named only as beneficiaries in the event of my death, before the payout date. It was meant to be my freedom, my escape hatch. Grandma Eleanor told me once, holding my hand and looking me straight in the eyes. This money is for you to be brave, my dear. Not for you to be comfortable, but for you to be free to choose your own path, away from the expectations of the others. Those words were a lifeline to me, a promise of a future where I could actually study art history, maybe live in Europe for a bit, and not be forced into a sensible business degree at a university Dad approved of. The thing was I was resented that trust, not the money itself. He had plenty, but the control. He hated that he couldn't touch it, couldn't leverage it, couldn't tell me what I should do with it. Over the years, he'd make these passive-aggressive comments. It's a shame your grandmother tied your hands like that, giving you all that money so young. You won't appreciate the value of a dollar. He'd say, or, that money is doing nothing for you just sitting there. I could triple it in a year if you just let me invest it in my next venture. I always politely, but firmly, declined. I knew what his ventures meant: high risk, high reward gambles that worked just off him, addicted to the adrenaline. For the last year I'd noticed a shift in my dad. He was perpetually stressed, his Italian suits looked a little less crisp, his hair a little less perfectly coiffed. The office calls were louder, more frantic, and usually ended with him slamming the phone down and muttering about liquidity and these amateur financiers. His real estate firm, Thorne Holdings, was getting into trouble. He'd over-leveraged on a massive, speculative development, a luxury condo complex that was stalled due to permitting issues and a sudden downturn in the market. The project was bleeding cash, and the bank was getting aggressive. Mom was oblivious, or perhaps willfully ignorant, continuing her cycle of high-end shopping and charity planning, insisting everything was just a temporary market correction. My own life was an effort in quiet resistance. I was in my final year of college, on track to graduate with a degree my parents wanted me to have, but secretly I was applying to graduate schools in London for art conservation. I had my own little secret stash of savings, about $50,000, that I'd built up from various summer jobs and side hustles, which was enough to cover the application fees and a plane ticket, but nowhere near enough for tuition and living expenses. The trust fund, that $2 million, was the keys to my entire plan. It was the only reason I was sitting through my dad's boring dinner monologues about tax codes and property lines. I was just biding my time, waiting for my 25th birthday and the sweet sound of a wire transfer hitting my new, secret bank account. Then came the issue with the Warhol. My grandmother, Eleanor, wasn't just wealthy, she had impeccable taste. One of the items not included in the main trust, but left to me directly in her personal will, was a minor, but authenticated, Andy Warhol silk screen print. It wasn't one of the famous Marilyns, but a beautifully vibrant 1.5 million print of a flower, hung prominently in the formal dining room. The will stated it was mine, to do with as I wished. I loved that piece. It was the only splash of real, electric color in our otherwise beige traditional home. My dad, of course, had always seen it as the asset, a piece of collateral, not a piece of art. He'd casually mention its value every few months, the Warhols holding its value nicely. Or, that thing could finance a small country. About 2 months before the infamous text, he started getting specific. He didn't ask to sell it. He just offered to sell it for me, saying, "The market is peaking for pop art, sweetheart. You'll never get a better price. We could put the money into an aggressive, short-term bond fund. You'd have a better return than just letting it hang there." I refused, just like I refused with the trust. I told him I loved the painting and would keep it. What he didn't know was that, right before he started pressuring me, I'd been contacted by a very discreet, very high-end art broker. This broker, a woman named Eliza, was representing a European collector who had a specific interest in this lesser-known wall series. She offered me a price that was frankly astounding, 2.2 million. The extra 700,000 was a once-in-a-lifetime premium. I did my due diligence, consulted an independent appraiser, and everything checked out. The opportunity was too good to pass up, especially since I knew my dad's mounting debt crisis meant the painting wouldn't be safe much longer under his roof. He'd find a way to mortgage it or simply sell it behind my back. That painting was the one thing he didn't realize I had complete and total control over right now. Not 6 weeks from now. I spent weeks making the secret arrangements. I used my savings to hire a lawyer specializing in art transactions, made sure the transfer was completely untraceable back to my dad's financial sphere, and set up a private, offshore account under a holding company name that was so generic it was invisible. The whole process was paranoid and cloak and dagger, but I felt justified. I was protecting my own inheritance from a man who was clearly spiraling. The sale closed at 10:00 a.m. that Monday morning. The wire transfer of 2.2 million hit my new account just a few minutes later, and I had confirmation from Eliza that the painting was safely crated and on its way out of the country. I felt this incredible rush of vindication and relief. My freedom was secured, and it was a bigger slice of freedom than I'd originally been promised. I poured myself that celebratory, yet terrible, cup of coffee at 11:00 a.m., feeling smug and relieved. And then, at 11:15 a.m., the text came, "Your trust fund is gone." My heart didn't just sink, it plummeted, taking my stomach with it. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. 2 million. Gone. Not lost in the market, not devalued, but us gone. I immediately called the pendant firm that managed the trust, my mind racing 1,000 miles a minute. The man on the phone, the managing partner, sounded deeply uncomfortable. He confirmed the worst, but it wasn't what I expected, in a hushed professional tone, that there had been a very high-level, sophisticated fraud committed. A forged document, a seemingly legitimate court order from a state jurisdiction halfway across the country, had instructed the firm to liquidate and transfer the funds. They had followed the protocol, albeit reluctantly, and the money had been routed through several shell corporations and was now, for all intents and purposes, irretrievable. He was adamant this was not a simple clerical error. This was a criminal act, executed with insider knowledge of the trust structure and my grandmother's will. The detail they had was too specific for a random hacker. I hung up the phone, the reality settling over me like a suffocating blanket. It wasn't the market. It was a person, and the only person who knew all the intimate details of my grandmother's financial life, who had the motive, the connections, and the sheer audacity to pull off such a massive, deliberate theft of my future, was my father. He must have been desperate. His real estate firm must not just be in trouble, it must be completely underwater. He had stolen my inheritance, the legacy of the only person who truly cared for me. He had not only disrespected my grandmother's wishes, but had burned my entire future to save his sinking ship. And then I looked back at his text, "Your trust fund is gone." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a confession. It was a cold, cruel statement of fact, a confirmation that the betrayal was complete. He had texted me this because he believed he was now in the clear. He believed he had covered his tracks so well that the third party firm was taking the fall, claiming fraud. While he had quietly used the money to shore up his failing empire, or at least pay off the most immediate debts, the timing of his text was the most damning part. He sent it after he knew the transfer was complete and irreversible. He sent it to establish his own narrative. "It's gone, honey, terrible bad luck, nothing I could do." But what he didn't know was that I had the $2.2 million from the Warhol sale sitting in an offshore account that nobody in my family knew existed. My $2 million was gone, but my $2.2 million was safe. I was the one who had secured my future, completely independent of the trust fund he had just obliterated. The realization hit me with an incredible, dizzying force. I was safe. I was free, and he had just confessed his crime, not knowing I had the means to watch him fall without a single consequence to myself. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, the silence of the house deafening. I could see the empty space on the dining room wall where the Warhol used to hang, a pale rectangle of slightly cleaner paint against the aging wallpaper. It was my secret, my leverage, my incredible, unbelievable insurance policy. I could have messaged him back right then. I could have screamed at him, confessed my own secret, and demanded the money back. Threatened to call the police and tell them exactly who had the specific, insider knowledge to pull off the fraud. But in that moment, seeing the depth of his calculated, desperate cruelty, a different feeling took hold, air of cold, hard fury, and a desire for justice that went beyond just getting my money back. I wanted him to face the full consequences of his desperation. I wanted him to feel the complete, crushing weight of what he had done. I thought about all the years of control, the manipulation, the constant undercurrent of conditional love that defined my childhood. The way he belittled my interests, the way he treated my mother, the way he viewed every single person in his life as a pawn to be used for his own advancement. This wasn't just about $2 million. This was about him taking the one sacred thing my grandmother had given me and desecrating it for his own selfish gain. He needed to be taught a lesson, a final, definitive one, and I was in the unique position to deliver it, not as a victim, but as a silent, powerful observer. I knew that the $2,000 million from the trust was only a band-aid for his failing company, Thorne Holdings. He had borrowed from Peter to pay Paul, and Paul was still demanding the whole debt. I knew his last, desperate hope, the one thing he was scrambling for, was securing a major bridge loan, a financial Hail Mary that required significant collateral. He needed one big injection of capital to survive the next 90 days, or the entire house of cards would come down, and he would face personal bankruptcy and criminal investigation for what he was doing with company assets. I realized that the one single, most valuable, and liquid asset he knew about, the one thing he was counting on being able to leverage to get that loan, was the Ars Warhol painting. He had probably already factored its value into his negotiations for the bridge loan. He likely had a plan: sell the trust fund for immediate cash, then use the Warhol as collateral for the big loan. He was planning to bleed me dry in 2 separate transactions. The thought of him sitting in his office, completely unaware that his collateral was currently flying over the Atlantic Ocean, gave me a sickening, powerful satisfaction. So, that's the situation I was in. My father had committed grand larceny against me, believing he was now safe and that I was ruined, while I had just secured my future through a separate, equally valuable asset he assumed was still on his dining room wall and available to save his company. I had to decide if I should expose him immediately, risk a messy, years-long legal battle and perhaps get a fraction of the money back, or if I should remain silent, let him proceed with his desperate plans, and watch his entire, fragile world collapse because the collateral he needed, my painting, was gone. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have saved him, or would you have let him face the music completely alone? I chose silence. A heavy, calculated, unforgiving silence. I didn't respond to his text. I didn't call him. I acted as if I was completely devastated, too distraught to speak. I sent a text to my mother that afternoon: "The trust is gone. Dad will explain." I wanted to transfer the responsibility of the news to him, to watch him fumble his explanation to Mom, whose emotional response he would be forced to deal with. For the next week, I was a ghost. I skipped classes and stayed in my apartment, ignoring every call from my parents. I needed time to process, but mostly, I needed time for Dad's inevitable desperation to peak. I knew his loan negotiations were in the final stages. He was running out of time. My mother, bless her knave heart, finally tracked me down and came to my apartment, sobbing. She didn't understand the complexities of the fraud, only that the bank was terrible, and your father is so upset. I let her cry, nodding sympathetically, making sure to ask, with feigned innocence, as Dad stressed about the loan he was talking about. He mentioned something about needing a big piece of collateral. That planted the seed I needed in her mind, tying his distress about my loss to his own, more immediate financial pressure. The climax came on the following Friday. My father, completely cornered, had his final meeting scheduled to secure the piece-tier 10 million bridge loan that would save David Thorne Holdings. He needed two things: an iron-clad business plan and his $3 million in liquid collateral, which he intended to cover with the Warhol, valued at a minimum of $1.5 million, and some highly speculative assets. But even $1.5 million was enough to tip the scale. Around 9:00 a.m., my father called me. His voice was strained, thick with forced composure. "Sweetheart, I need your help. A very small, temporary thing. I need to take the Warhol to the appraiser this afternoon for the final loan paperwork. It's just for collateral. I'll have it back tonight, I promise. This is a very big deal for the company, for all of us." This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. I allowed a long, dramatic pause, and then I spoke, my voice a carefully constructed blend of broken vulnerability and confusion. "Dad," I whispered, "the Warhol, what are you talking about? It's gone." The line went completely silent. I could almost hear the blood draining from his face. What is gone, honey?" "The painting. The Warhol on the dining room wall." "What are you saying?" He finally stammered. I continued the performance of the distraught daughter whose one other major asset had just vanished, as if the universe was conspiring against me. "The painting, Dad. It was sold. A collector had been trying to get it for years. I had the official appraisal from Grandma's estate, and since the will explicitly stated it was mine, without restrictions, I sold it a few weeks ago. The market was perfect. I got a really good price. I was going to surprise you on my birthday. I figured I would take that money and combine it with the trust money, and use it to fund my art school in London. But now, with the trust gone, I don't know what I'll do with the money. I just hope the check clears." I used the words, "sold," will explicitly stated, and got a really good price, just to drive the knife in deeper. I mentioned the check clearing, which was an intentional red herring, making him think the money was still in transit, not secretly secured. The subsequent explosion was not on the phone. It was in the background, a sickening sound of a ceramic coffee mug shattering against a wall. He didn't scream at me, not at first. He spoke in a low, terrifying growl. "You sold my collateral. You did this without telling me. What did you do with the money?" "My money, Dad." I corrected him, my voice still small but firm. "Was my painting, and now it's my money. I put it in an offshore holding account I set up. To protect it. After what happened to the trust, I figured it was the safest thing to do." The phrasing was perfect. After what happened to the trust, I used his own crime against him, implying he was such a financial liability that I had to take extreme measures to protect myself. He finally snapped. "You selfish, ungrateful little idiot. That money was supposed to save my company. That painting was the one thing that could have secured the bridge loan. Do you have any idea what you've just done?" He was practically spitting fire. "I think I do, Dad," I said, dropping the broken voice and letting my true, cold anger show. "I think I secured my own future, just in time, because someone, a thief who had unlimited access to my grandmother's most private documents, stole my $2 million trust fund. I protected the only thing I had left from the kind of person who would steal from his own child. Now, you'll have to go to that meeting without any collateral, and you can explain to your bankers why your biggest asset suddenly vanished." I hung up on him. I didn't wait for his response. I muted my phone and sat back, feeling a profound, exhausted emptiness mixed with a terrible, sweet vindication. The aftermath was exactly what I had planned, only faster and more brutal than I had anticipated. My father, without the $200 million from the trust, which he had used for a temporary, partial debt payment, and without the crucial collateral of the Warhol, went into his meeting completely exposed. The bankers, already skittish, saw through his desperation. By the end of the day, the news was spreading. David Thorne Holdings was being forced into immediate liquidation. They called in their existing loans which he couldn't cover. His personal assets, which he had foolishly collateralized with the company, were now on the block. His Italian suits, his expensive cars, the house I grew up in. All gone. The most damning consequence, however, was the investigation into the trust fund fraud. Once the company collapsed, the independent firm that managed my trust, suddenly under intense scrutiny, launched their own official criminal investigation. They quickly zeroed in on the sophisticated nature of the forgery and the insider knowledge required, and all roads, inevitably, led back to David, Within 2 weeks, my father was formally charged with wire fraud, forgery, and grand larceny. He had stolen my inheritance to delay his company's inevitable failure, and in his arrogance, he didn't realize I had already protected my second, more liquid asset from him. His desperate move was not just a failure, it was the final, irreversible nail in his own coffin. My mother, Carol, was completely destroyed. She went from denial to rage to utter despair. She was forced to sell every piece of jewelry he had ever bought her, downsize to a tiny rented apartment in a distant suburb, and actually get a part-time job. Something she had never done in her life. She blamed me at first, calling me an ungrateful daughter whose selfish decision to sell a painting ruined the family. I simply told her to look up the court records for the trust fund fraud. When she finally saw the detailed filings, saw that my own father was a common criminal who had stolen my future, she finally understood the depth of the betrayal. She hasn't spoken to him since. As for me, I am currently sitting in a beautiful little apartment in Florence, Italy, having enrolled in the art conservation program I always dreamed of. The $2.2 million from the Warhol, my real trust fund, is safely and conservatively invested. It's more than enough. My grandmother's words echo in my mind every day. This money is for you to be brave, my dear. Not for you to be comfortable, but for you to be free to choose your own path, away from the expectations of the others. She gave me the tools, and my father's greed gave me the courage. He sits in a jail cell now, awaiting trial, his legacy nothing but shame and a mountain of debt. He thought he could steal my freedom, instead he gifted it to me, wrapped in the cold, hard logic of his own ruin. The moral of this story is simple: never underestimate the quiet one. Never assume that your children are too naive or too dependent to outmaneuver your greed. I learned that trust is a fragile thing, and when it's shattered, the fallout can be catastrophic, especially when you think you're holding all the cards. I saved myself, and I let him fall. I sleep perfectly well at night knowing that I had a right to protect what was mine, and that the justice he's facing is entirely self-inflicted. He thought the trust was gone and that his plan was complete. He didn't know I had sold the Warhol, and that single fact was the one small, perfect stone that brought down his entire Goliath. So, that's my full story. The silence I caused, the most expensive silence my father ever experienced, and it was the best investment I ever made. Like this video if you were on my side. If you think I was right to let him face the consequences completely alone. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one, because believe me, my family has more secrets than they have sense. And share your final, unvarnished thoughts whole mess in the comments section below. I want to know if you think I'm a cold-hearted avenger, or just a smart survivor. I'll see you all in the next story.